Good morning, and welcome to your morning cereal. Okay, good morning, and welcome to Wednesday, affectionately known as Hump Day. Well, I hope you recovered from all the festivities from National Milk a Cow on an Airplane Day yesterday. And you've made it to the middle of the week, and as a reward, it's National Chocolate Mint Day. So go ahead and treat yourself to an Andes Mint. Those are the best. Unless, of course, you're allergic to chocolate, and in that case, you've got National Prevent Plagiarism Day. Not quite as tasty, but have at it. Okay, let's jump into today's quotes. One fun, nostalgic quote, and then a second quote to tease our book review later in the episode. Hopefully, one of these quotes will speak to you and jumpstart your day in a positive direction. The first quote is from John Bon Jovi, who said, quote, "Don't get too comfortable with who you are at any given time. You may miss the opportunity to become who you want to be," end quote. I like this. We should always be looking for opportunities to improve ourselves and to grow in life. And today's teaser quote from the book review is, quote, "Any fool can try to defend his or her mistakes, and most fools do. But it raises one above the herd and gives one a feeling of nobility and exultation to admit one's mistakes," end quote. As usual, we'll unpack that here in just a few minutes during the book review segment. But first, let's jump into our usual dose of fun and historic facts from this day in history. And today's news facts and birthdays are for February 19th. Starting back in 1878, American inventor Thomas Edison, he patented the phonograph. It was the first machine to be able to reproduce a recorded sound. Then jumping up to 1906, Will Keith Kellogg, together with Charles Boland, they founded the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company, which is known now as the food conglomerate Kellogg's. Rumor has it that Will Kellogg broke off another company with his brother over an argument because Will wanted to put sugar in their cereal. Seems like one of them was onto something. Then in 1945, U.S. Marines invaded Iwo Jima on this day. It was one of the final phases of World War II, where the Marines invaded to wrest control of the strategically important island of the Japanese, who put up fierce resistance in the ensuing battles. You'll remember that's the picture of the iconic flag raising and the statue that we all know so well. Then in 1945, one of the websites that I go to find these facts, they labeled this one a fun fact. And it was that reportedly 980 Japanese soldiers were killed by crocodiles over 2 days on Ramri Island in Burma. Note to self, avoid Myanmar. Then in 1986, the Mir space station was launched. It was the Soviet vehicle. It was the first modular space station, and it remained in orbit for 15 years. Then in 1995, the group Roxette became the first Western group to perform in Beijing since George Michael did it in 1984, when he played a concert celebrating the Chinese New Year. Then skipping all the way up to 2008, that's when Fidel Castro formally resigned as president of Cuba. He was succeeded by his brother Raul. And finally, in 2008, Toshiba announced its formal recall of the HD DVD video format. That ended the format war between it and Sony Blu-ray disc. So glad I made the investment for all those Sony Blu-ray discs. Well, happy birthday if today is your birthday. You share a birthday with singer Seal. He's 62 today. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell, he's 66. And Smokey Robinson, he's 85 today. And the number one song on this date, way back in 1987, was Livin' on a Prayer by Bon Jovi. This is a staple 1980s rock anthem that everybody knows and loves and is regarded as Bon Jovi's signature song. The song was rated as the best song of the decade by VH1. So many good songs. I don't know how they can say that definitively. But apparently, this song was originally included on the band's previous record as a secret song. If you recall when people used to do that on CDs, it would be a 15-minute song, and 11 minutes into it, they'd start another song. It's the secret songs. But they re-recorded it, they changed the bass line, added some different drum fills, and the rest is triple platinum history. And the number one movie on this date in 1999 was Payback, starring Mel Gibson. It was a movie about a thief who was betrayed by his partner, and Mel Gibson's character, I think, plans and executes a revenge on his partner. I'm sure I saw it at some point. Okay, well, on that note, let's move on to some personal growth in the book review segment of Morning Cereal. where we take a few moments to reflect on lessons learned from the current book we're reading. And currently, we're reading through Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a timeless book. It's consistently on all the must-read lists. It's packed with rock-solid advice and actions for us all to use and build healthy foundational concepts to live by. Yesterday, we began the third chapter in part 3, entitled, If You Were Wrong, Admit It. And Carnegie started the chapter suggesting that we beat others to the punch if we are wrong, saying, quote, if we know we are going to be rebuked anyhow, isn't it far better to beat the other person to it and do it to ourselves? Isn't it much easier to listen to the self-criticism than to bear condemnation from alien lips? End quote. And if we do this, chances are the other person will have a forgiving attitude and minimize our mistake. Carnegie relays another story supporting this philosophy, and it's about an advertising artist who, after having learned of this technique of admitting fault, had come across his chance to use it. Now, the artist was called to the director's office, a director who was known for taking delight in finding errors and gloating and criticizing the artists over it. Well, instead of defending himself after the director's initial onslaught, the artist said, quote, Mr. So-and-so, if what you say is true, I am at fault and there is absolutely no excuse for my blunder. I have been doing drawings for you long enough to know better. I'm ashamed of myself, end quote. The artist said immediately the director began to defend the artist, but the artist continued, for the first time, criticizing himself, saying that he actually kind of enjoyed it. This only disarmed the director even more. The director ended up saying it was only a small matter and actually began praising the artist. Carnegie says, quote, there is a certain degree of satisfaction in having the courage to admit one's errors. It not only clears the air of guilt and defensiveness, but often helps solve the problem created by the error, end quote. In another story, Carnegie gives us another example of admitting when we are wrong that perhaps feels more like a real-life outcome. A man in the payroll department made a mistake on someone's check that resulted in overpayment. There was no other choice but to tell the boss that it was his fault, which he knew would, quote, result in a boss-like explosion, end quote. Well, the man told his boss he made a mistake, and his boss responded in an explosive manner, saying it was the payroll's department's fault. Well, the man again said it was his fault, and the boss again exploded about carelessness. Again, no, it was just my fault, and again the boss blamed 2 others in the payroll department. The man reiterated it was his fault, and finally the boss said, quote, okay, it was your fault, now straighten it out, end quote. I like this example from Carnegie because it isn't the typical Carnegie story of the two become best friends and become the 2 most wealthy people in history. No, it was a simple story that the man was still verbally reprimanded by his boss, even after admitting his faults several times. So what did the man gain? Well, first, the man felt great because he stepped up and he took responsibility. And secondly, he gained respect and credibility from his boss for taking that responsibility. Here, Carnegie says, quote, any fool can try to defend his or her mistakes, and most fools do. But it raises one above the herd and gives one a feeling of nobility and exaltation to admit one's mistakes, end quote. Carnegie recalls Pickett's failed charge at the Battle of Gettysburg, where General Lee was too noble to blame others, and he rode out to the battlefield saying, quote, all this has been my fault. I and I alone have lost this battle, end quote. And Carnegie suggests few generals in history would have the character and the courage to admit that. In another story, Carnegie recalls the account of a Chinese father who took this Carnegie course, and he was struggling with Chinese tradition for admitting he was wrong. See, in Chinese tradition, it was not acceptable for the elder to take the first step towards a reconciliation. And the father, who had once been addicted to drugs but was now clean for a long period of time, he was no longer in touch with his son, who now had children, grandchildren that the father had never known. Well, he longed to reconnect, but tradition would not allow it. And after some time, the father said to the class that he knew Carnegie taught that, quote, if you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. And the father said he could not admit he was wrong quickly because of so much time that had passed, but he could admit he was wrong emphatically. And as such, the father decided to break tradition and to admit he was wrong and ask for forgiveness. And he was rewarded. He was rewarded to be back into his son's life with open arms. Carnegie ends this chapter by saying, quote, "When we are right, let's try to win people gently and tactfully to our way of thinking. And when we are wrong, and that will be surprisingly often, if we are honest with ourselves, let's admit our mistakes quickly and with enthusiasm." End quote. And a final citing of an old proverb, quote, "By fighting, you never get enough, but by yielding, you get more than you expected." End quote. Here it is, Carnegie's principle number 3 in a chapter entitled, "If you're wrong, admit it." Principle number 3 is, if you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. I know the lessons learned in this chapter can be hard for the ego to swallow at times, but give it a try, and I think you'll see the magic in it right away. Well, we're in a great spot. It's Wednesday, we're halfway through the week, but remember, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. So make those moments in between matter. Thanks for joining today, and have a fantastic day. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Morning Serial podcast on the One Life Live It channel. You can find more episodes and videos by visiting our YouTube channel and the website at Sean Inglis and at SeanInglis.com, where you can also follow our other podcasts, the Mr. and Mrs. Inglis podcast and the Life Happens podcast. In these other podcasts, we'll dive deeper into everyday issues, self-improvement and well-being, business and finance, and we welcome special guests too. So join us. It'll be a good time, I promise. Thanks again for listening. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you tomorrow.